This is Family Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Scott Miller for the first time. Welcome to the Family Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing tonight?
Man, I am doing awesome, Adam. Thank you for having me.
Want to let people know that we have a QR code here, and if you're a podcaster, like we're both podcasters, and you want to be able to link up with guests or find host to guest, a guest to host, you can scan that QR code and find out all about it. That's Podmatch. It's how we got to this episode today, is how we book our guest. Want to let you know you can check that out. And then we're going to switch that out after a little bit. But before we get to the heart of your story, I always ask every guest a couple of questions. What motivates you, and why do you do what you do?
Great questions and a great way to get started. Thank you. First of all, I was narrating audiobooks before I married my wife and we moved to Costa Rica. I wasn't going to narrate audiobooks in Costa Rica, had a couple of side gigs that were supposed to last a long time, and they both disappeared, phantom, in the first 2 months. And I'm in Costa Rica and I'm like, oh, okay, what am I going to do now for money? So I started narrating audiobooks again. The problem with narrating somebody else's audiobooks is once you finish that audiobook, you're basically unemployed, and you need to keep narrating audiobooks forever if you want to keep getting paid. So I then began to look at what can I do that's mine? And I came across public domain stories, and I chose science fiction for my niche because I love science fiction. And so the reason I started down this road was to provide for me and my wife, and it's kind of fun. Every day around the world, somebody is buying an audiobook that I create, or a short story, if you will, that I created 6 months ago, a year ago, 4 years ago. So there's recurring revenue. Then, so I wanted to create something that would provide for my wife when I'm no longer here. And that is thankfully what we've done. Now, what motivates me today, besides wanting to fulfill that promise to my wife, is, and I'm flabbergasted and floored by this, but it's the tens of thousands of listeners we have around the world. They motivate me because I'm sure you get this. They send me an email saying they love what we're doing, or they loved a particular story. So it's that feedback and those 5-star reviews that we get that that motivates me to. The blue thing you see behind me is my booth. Yep. And so that motivates me to go in the booth and record audiobooks. That and the love of storytelling and bringing these old stories, some of them more than 100 years old, to life. That is, Phantom, that is fun.
That's interesting, because I love sci-fi. I mean, I'm a child of the 70s, and I was always like in love with like the Twilight Zone and Outer Limits.
Of course.
Gene Roddenberry, Isaac Asimov, and Ben Bove. I was always reading tons of science fiction, Swiftly Tilting Planet, the Time Quartet. I was always into like anything I could get to. I loved Rod Serling and I loved Gene Roddenberry because I like what you can do in science fiction is you can make statements about society and bury it in the science fiction.
Yes. Yeah. And it's so obvious now for me that I might not have gotten what they were trying to do 30 or 40 years ago or 50 years ago. I get it now because of, I think, life experience. Yeah. So, and for me, it started with Planet of the Apes, the original movie.
Yeah, Ryan wrote that. He wrote that.
Yeah, I was like 8 or 9 years old when I went to see that. Never forget it. Have seen every Planet of the Apes franchise movie in theaters because I have to, if that makes sense.
It's a really cool concept. I mean, but Rod wrote it. I mean, that first screenplay is his. It's his idea. It's a concept. It really makes sense given his like ironic science fiction kind of morality tales. He likes to kind of make statements about like the world, and that it's like Monsters on Maple Street. I mean, he's always trying to make a subtext of like what could happen. Like if we blow
Yeah.
ourselves up, what happens? Well, the apes take over. You know.
Yep.
So it's always I love that, and I was a comic book fan. You know, I was a big Stan Lee, Jack Kirby guy, like early Marvel comics, like all that. And that was they, you know, in the early '50s, they were kind of following what was going on with you know, the Outer Limits and Twilight Zone. They were all these like monster anthology sci-fi tales, like strange tales,
Yeah.
all these tales about these weird things happening, and there were morality plays, but. I think it's interesting that you're finding like the unknown science fiction. Like, you know, people used to read these science fiction like comic books, like, you know, that were like these, like they would have like EC had like all these, you know, it's a label that got knocked out of business, but they had all these sci-fi stories that were really
Well, you know
amazing.
what's interesting, Phantom, what's interesting that I never knew, a lot of these vintage sci-fi authors also wrote comic books.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
a lot of them, they crossed over between comic books
Yeah,
and
EC
vintage
writers.
sci-fi short stories.
Yeah, some of
it's
them were like the
fascinating.
EC comic writers, and they were the Atlas Marvel comic writers, and they were crossing between genres. It's cool because there's a lot of creativity in that, and finding like
Yeah.
the unknown. Like in music, I like to find like unknown bands that
Yeah.
like are really good. Like an example, like the Velvet Underground, like Lou Reed and the Velvets, like nobody who knew who they were.
Yep.
Like, and eventually people
Yeah.
found out. You know, everybody who listened to them ended up being like a producer or a musician. They were all inspired. But so when you find these kind of gems, because like sometimes if you watch the radio, you see the popular movies or the popular books. It's cool to find the stuff that's like it's like hidden in the corners in this little rare bookstore. You find something. That to me is always like, because I want to see the stories that newfound stories that nobody knows.
Yeah. Well, and that is, and it's funny you would bring that up, but the Lost Sci-Fi Podcast was originally intended to be mostly, if not exclusively, lost sci-fi. In other words, sci-fi stories that everybody forgot about.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that was my original intention with the podcast. Now, it has developed because of listener requests. I get a ton of requests. Like I wasn't going to do any H.P. Lovecraft, but I kept getting people that said, why aren't you doing Lovecraft? I want to hear a Lovecraft story. So I listened to my listeners.
Yeah.
Did my first Lovecraft story. And guess what? The numbers shot up. There were more people that listened to that story than the typical story that I did. So I did another one and another one. Yeah, exactly.
That's cool.
So the audience grew.
Yeah. Well, H.P. Lovecraft inspired there's a lot of comic books that were inspired by his work. I mean, it's like DC, Marvel, EC, there's tons of work that if you go look, and I'm a big, you know, comic head. I go to conventions. I look for stuff from the 50s and 60s, even the early 70s. You still had this stuff. And it was just amazing. I really was gravitated. A lot of people like the superhero books. I liked looking at the sci-fi, you know, the horror books, because they're really different.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny you would say that. Lovecraft also influenced a ton of writers. And I released yesterday a story for the first time ever by this author, Robert Bloch. Well, people say Robert Bloch. That kind of sounds familiar.
Yeah,
Robert Bloch wrote the novel Psycho, which he didn't write the screenplay that became Alfred Hitchcock's, huge success, but he wrote the book that inspired the story. And I did a Robert Bloch story yesterday. I do this on occasion. I have another Robert Bloch story that probably will be released sometime tomorrow afternoon. So, and Bloch was communicating with Lovecraft as a lot of authors did, and was influenced by him. So, it's funny. Yeah. There's so many great stories that people are not familiar with. And in addition to that, Phantom, I get a lot of listeners who bought these magazines in the 40s and in the 50s and read some of these stories when they were kids.
Yeah, because that's like the pulp magazines that had all this stuff.
Yes, exactly. And so that brings back memories for them. And I think that's part of the reason why I've developed such a rabid following. It's like, and I find this in my own life, I kind of want to go back to some of the things when I was young.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's like as a child of the 70s, I mean, I grew up really enamored with like stuff from the 50s and 60s because cause I had an older brother who was like 7 years older, and he had, so he had been going around and finding EC comics and finding weird science fantasy and reading Lovecraft. And he was always like watching like Night Gallery and Boris Karloff Thriller and Outer Limits. And like, I was told I can't watch that stuff. Like my older brother, he could, but I couldn't. So
you were too young.
But I'd tell you, he always like sneak me, like, here's like, read this weird fantasy or this Tales from the Crypt. And he'd have it, but I'm not supposed to read it. And it's the one time I got caught.
Funny.
Like, what are you doing with your brother's book? I was like, well, like I was kind of intrigued.
Well, that reminds me that Robert Bloch, when he was 10 years old, got in 1927, he was 10 years old. They were at a train station and his aunt said, I'll buy you any magazine you want. And he wanted to buy Weird Tales. She wasn't a big fan of that. So that's when he became hooked at 10 years old in 1927. And then he had this lifelong career of writing science fiction because he loved it so much. And that's a common story from a lot of vintage sci-fi authors. They got hooked at a young age. They stayed hooked. They were fans first, and then they were authors. And one more thing about Robert Bloch, he and I love telling the backstory at the beginning of the podcast because it's stuff that most people just don't know, and I find fascinating. I figured other people would find fascinating. So when he's this 10, 11, 12-year-old kid, he would go to the tobacco store on the release day of the magazine, and he would go, and it was tobacco and magazines, and he would go there. And, sometimes, Phantom, they got a little risque on the cover, right?
Oh,
yeah. He would hide it. A lot of times, he would hide the magazine under his coat when he went in the house. You reminded me of that when you were talking about hiding stuff. He would hide the magazine under his coat to get in the house and to get away with it. And but it's such a fascinating genre and such fascinating stories that, again, that most people have never heard. So even though most of our audience is 35 to 40 plus, but we're starting to attract some more younger people who are also loving the science fiction.
Well, you always go back. I mean, I grew up with the newsstands, and then later got into like the actual comic book stores that were exclusive to comic books, and they had all this old stuff. They had the stuff from the 30s and the 40s. They had the pulp fiction. They had the detective stories. They had they weren't comics. They were like magazines, like the ones you're not, like crime magazines, detective magazines, horror magazines, sci-fi magazines, and they had the EC, which are from like the 50s, and Crime Doesn't Pay, books like that. And you had these writers, and it really, at that point, those comic books weren't really meant for kids. It's kind of like in Japan.
No, they were not.
They were meant for like guys coming back from war. I mean, the GIs were reading them. Adults were reading these books. And so when the kids got them, then, Wertheimer went crazy and got the code and changed everything, became superheroes. But like, there's this whole period where you have the sci-fi. Like today, you really don't have the sci-fi at the level that it was in the 50s or the 40s and even the early 60s. It's like it's dropped off.
No, you're right. You're right. And it's a fascinating thing, too. If you write science fiction today, you can write it based on knowledge of all kinds of stuff that when you go back in the 1800s and early 1900s, there had been no space travel. There had been no observation of what was going on in Mars. And so these people, there was no internet. There were no television screens back in the 10s and the 20s. It was all imagination.
Yeah.
It was all imagination.
Like H.G. Wells. You look at H.G. Wells' work. And you see all the stuff that where they're talking about, John Carter, Warlord of Mars, This
Yes.
stuff like that. There was all this interesting stuff, and I was drawn to that stuff. I was reading John Carter, Warlord of Mars. I was looking at H.G. Wells. I'm looking at these old sci-fi magazines, like weird fantasy, weird science fantasy, all this stuff. And I thought it was just super interesting. And I was really intrigued with Gene Roddenberry, and even stuff like Space 1999 from the BBC. And I was watching stuff like that. I was watching there's a lot of interesting stuff like The Prisoner. That was kind of like a weird sci-fi thing. But I was really intrigued with like British science fiction, and going back and reading Mary Shelley, and going back and finding anything I could read. There was a really tie into this interesting work. I just thought science fiction to me was like super interesting. And it's kind of like a nerdy thing. All the nerdy kids, like we were all like Trekkies, and people were like, look at us like, oh, you Trekkies, what are you doing? But it's like, we thought it was cool.
Sure, absolutely. And did you know that when Mary Shelley released Frankenstein, the book, in the early 1800s, it was uncredited because she didn't think, though she was a woman, she did not think the world was ready to hear such a horrifying tale written by really a woman.
Horrifying. I've read the original, I mean, it's deep. And most people have seen the movies. The movies don't really do credit to what she actually wrote.
No,
until you get like some of the later movies, like the new versions, closer to her vision. But it's not exactly. It's still like if you read, it's like, wow, this is really heavy. There's a lot going on.
Yeah,
and sometimes people, I don't know if they have the attention span to read classic science fiction today. So we have some people that want to go back because they feel like they're not getting anything substantial, so they want to go back and find the cool stuff.
Well, if they don't think they have the attention span to read science fiction, they probably have the attention span to listen to the Lost Sci-Fi Podcast. See how I squeezed that?
It's a new way, because a lot of people like audiobooks. Well, the audiobooks is a way to kind of get somebody, and then if they get really interested, maybe they'll pick up the page. Because eventually you get drawn into say, hey, maybe I should go looking for this. Maybe I should go try to find these rare books. And go actually get a hold of one of these things. And I think like if you can get your entry level, we get people that go a little further.
It has saved me a lot of money living in Costa Rica because there are no vintage bookstores and places where all these old magazines would be, because I'd go buy them if I had access to them. So it's so cost prohibitive to ship it to Costa Rica, and there's taxes and all that. So I don't even buy it to ship it to Costa Rica. And I don't go to the States very often. So it saved me a lot of money not having those things available, because I would go crazy in those stores. Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of a collector. So I hang out with the comic book mindset. Always looking for the old stuff, But it's cool today that I can access stuff through the net that I can't afford. Like if I can't find like Tales from the Crypt, or I can't find a weird science fantasy, I could always get like an electronic version and actually read it. And so it's cool that we have this ability to be able to get to this material. And like you said, it's interesting, like you try to like bring people in to these stories. Like Block, you were mentioning, and who are other authors that you're bringing to people?
Well, the one I started recording today, which will be released in like 3 or 4 days. You're familiar with Tom Godwin?
I think
he's not really well known.
Yeah,
he did a few things, but he did a story, and this was a controversial story. I believe it was in the 50s. I'm pretty sure. It's called The Cold Equations. Give you the synopsis real quick, and it's just a great story to narrate. So the quick synopsis is there's these big ships and this hyperspace drive, and these little outposts can't afford the big ships. So when they need supplies, the big ships release a little ship called an EDS. I don't remember what that stands for, but anyway, the EDS in this case, in this story, is on its way to this planet to rescue 6 people who need a serum that is on board the ship. But the big ships use nuclear power. Isn't that fascinating that they are atomic power? Isn't that fascinating all the way back anyway? But the small ships run on rocket fuel, and they calculate just how much fuel they need and nothing more, because it's very complicated to do this. So in this audiobook, or in this short story, the pilot recognizes a little thing on his dash that basically says you got a stowaway. So the rule is, because you got a limited amount of fuel, you have to release them into space, which kills them. And he's thinking it's a guy, no big deal, he shouldn't have stowed away. In this story, it's an 18-year-old girl who just wants to go see her brother that she hasn't seen since she was 8 years old. So I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story. You'll have to listen to the episode that'll be released Thursday, Friday, Saturday, something like that. But it is, Phantom, this is a great story. And it was controversial in the 1950s. And I won't tell you why, and I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story, but it's awesome. And so that's just an example.
Yeah, that one won an award, right? It was considered one of the best science fiction stories written before like 65. It came out like Astounding Magazine, which is one of those ones from the 50s. I think it's like 54. I believe
something like that. 54, 55. I don't remember exactly when, but great story. I mean, that's a great story. So I love telling those kinds of stories, but there's also, I can't remember the name of it now. Mary Carlson wrote a story, something about cold too. Anyway, Mary Carlson, as far as I can find, had only one story ever. That's it. One story. Wow, that's it. That's rare. And it's a great story. So, and actually it's not as rare as I have found looking through thousands of stories to narrate. There are actually quite a few people that wrote one story that was published and then were never heard from again.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And we know nothing about them. We don't know when they were born.
Yeah, because a lot of times if you're a writer and you don't kick off, then it's just sitting there. It could be in a magazine, it could be short stories, like publications that have all these collected short stories. And it's like, if you happen to find it or somebody else covers it, because sometimes what happens is like, screenwriters go find something and then they go and they adapt it. And then it gets bigger. And then you say, well, who originally wrote this? And then they'll credit it. And then you're like, oh, and then you find it. Have you found things like that? Like found things that modern day filmmakers have or TV producers have actually redone? Because that story you just said was done multiple times. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many of them. I can't remember any off the top of my head, just thinking right now, but there's so many stories like that were adapted for television, or the author actually did the adaptation for television or movies. There's a vintage sci-fi author, Frank M. Robinson. I've done a bunch of his stories. He wrote, I think, the book, and he was a co-author of this book. I think the book was called The Glass Inferno, which became the movie The Towering Inferno.
Oh, and
they adapted it and called it The Towering Inferno. So there's so many examples like that.
Is that the Erwin Allen?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I remember in the 70s, we used to see all his movies, like Towering Inferno, like Earthquake, all these. He had all the movies, like disaster movies.
He was big.
Yeah,
but so, was big. And I think that's one of the reasons for the appeal of the podcast is people connect with this older material, like you were talking about as a child, and reading these things and being into Lovecraft and all these other authors. I think that's a big part of why this has become so successful. And to be honest, Phantom, I did not anticipate, and I'm not being humble, I'm just being honest with you, I did not anticipate the success that I have enjoyed. We've been number one in 33 countries around the world.
Well,
Are you kidding me?
It makes sense because a lot of times my daughter, she's 25, and she's always being drawn to a lot of stuff from the 60s and 50s lately,
Really?
because she's looking
Yeah.
at like a lot of things today. She's an artist. She's a graphic artist, and she gets drawn to a
Okay.
lot of older work anyway. But just as an
Sure.
artist to learn. But it's just, like a lot of times you feel like sometimes the stuff today is not substantial. A lot of it's being
Yeah.
done because of algorithms and because it's a lot of cloning, a lot of copying, and people don't seem to be coming up with. And a lot of times the funding for original ideas doesn't seem to be there. So when
Yes,
people want to
you're
find
right.
something that is, all we see are remakes of things like 3-4 times. They keep on remaking things over and over. And I grew
Yeah.
up with original content, original
Yeah.
ideas happening in real time and like all over the place, from the comic books to the TV to books. And a lot of times they keep on getting sequels, and people keep on creating these like intellectual property, and they create this character, and it goes on forever and ever and ever and ever. I was like, well, I want
Yeah.
something new.
Yeah. Or in my case, something old.
Something
That's
old
new.
is new. Yeah, that's the thing.
Exactly.
Because if you don't know about it, it's new. And when you find all
Exactly.
these like one hit, like in music, we call them one hit wonders, or people
Yes.
would never even really kicked off. And when people are always finding like these gems, like really well produced records that didn't go anywhere, and you're like,
Yeah.
these guys are so good, and you're like, how did this happen? And you just, I think if people get interested in like, how did this not get through? And if you think about it, though, William Blake, one of the greatest romantic poets, he was not known in his time. They found
Yeah.
his poetry in a barn. He's one of the greatest Victorian
Wow.
poets. He was not known in his lifetime. They found his stuff
Well,
after he was dead.
you mentioned H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft is recognized now, and has been for decades, as a genius. But he died broke. I mean,
Yep,
he
it
died
happens.
penniless. He was not recognized when he was alive. And so there are a lot of people like that. And it's sad, but that's one of the reasons that I love doing this, is bringing those people the recognition that they should have, decades ago.
Well, I think it's cool to be able to bring people like there's something old is new, and to get people back into like at least appreciating like the spark of creativity that creates these original ideas. Especially
Yeah.
in science fiction, you have a lot of original concepts that people
Yep.
come up with these things, and it's pure imagination. Like you go back and say, it's like Mary Shelley's coming up with something. It's like, how would you know? How did she come up with something like that? Like, and then
Yeah.
you could think about H.G. Wells in War of the Worlds. And it's like, how do you come up with these things? Because like people had time to really dive into their imagination, and they
Yep.
maybe you're not rewarded right away, but it seems like there's not. I try to get people as a musician to really point out, it's like, you don't need to clone whatever's popular. You need to dive into what you feel and what is uniquely
Yeah.
yours. And I think that's what I like about science fiction. It's a really wide open kind of, you're thinking about things that like, oh yeah, but I don't care if it could exist. I'm going to make sure, create this thing, like a warp drive. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly. Warp
theoretical, like,
drives,
what is that? Hyperspace.
Yeah, hyperspace drives and all of this. Are you familiar with the short story? And I don't know that it's that short. I think it was an hour to 2 hours long. The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster.
Oh yeah, I know.
1919, I think. Don't hold me to that, because I've done hundreds of stories. But Forster saw screens, communication. He basically told about the internet in 1919 and having screens that you could communicate with people on.
Yeah, like even before everybody thought the Star Trek was like brought the mobile phone, but like he had the idea before that, kind of like an idea that's similar. Like,
so it's really cool. And then there's a guy by the name of Morrison Colliday that did a story called When the Moon Fell. And it's a fascinating story. I find myself drawn to a lot of apocalyptic science fiction.
Like
I don't know
world things.
I don't know what it is about that I just find, I guess because I'm worried about it. I don't know. But
Well, I
find myself.
But it's more epic if you have a disaster.
Exactly right. And so I love those kinds of stories. And again, most people have never heard of Morrison Colliday.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he did a few other things, but nothing that resonates with people. But When the Moon Fell, great story. So this is kind of funny. Phantom, my original plan when I started doing this was that I was going to start and I would never stop.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to keep doing this until I die, or I know it may sound morbid to some people, but that's the plan, or my health is such that I can't get in the booth anymore and do it, something, whatever it is. So other than that, Phantom, I'm doing this because my original goal was I'd love to do 2,000 stories. 2,000. There are probably, in the vintage science fiction arena that I know of, there's around 9,000 or 10,000 stories in the public domain. So I can never do them all. I won't live long enough to do them all. Mm-hmm. No, but I want to do, I had a goal to do 2,000. By the end of the year, around the end of the year, early January, I've done 462 or 463 episodes, but almost 500 stories, because some episodes I put in 2 stories and a couple of times I put in like 7 or 8 short stories. Mm-hmm. So I will hit 500 stories sometime in the next 2 weeks or so, awesome. Which sounds like a lot, but then when you compare it to 2,000, it's nothing. So
you still got a lot. You got a big archive of stuff you can go to like 9,000. So you got a lot to choose from.
Exactly. And I am picky. The number one criteria is it has to be in the public domain, so it's legal for me to record it and release it. The second criteria is I have to like it. Yeah. And if because I'm a science fiction fan, if I like it, not all the time, not but you can't please 20,000 or 30,000 people every time you do something, but I'm doing the best I can to appeal to a wide audience. But, one of the other advantages to like this podcast, you started 2018, 2019, something like that, a long time ago.
I actually started 2016 on experiment that was just on a phone, and then I switched to this I started doing video in 2020, but I've been around since 2016.
Okay,
so I'm at over like 1,300 episodes, but I'm crazy.
that is crazy. Well, congratulations on your success, because what I was going to say is one of the reasons podcasts fail is unrealistic expectations. You're expecting to release 2 or 3 episodes and for the world to know who you are. And that ain't happening.
It doesn't take a while.
And it's an interesting thing. Joe Rogan is recognized as one of the most popular podcasters in the world.
He's the big dog. Yeah.
But he started in, I think, 2009. And depending on what you put as your criteria for success or big success, it took him between 3 to 5 years. It took Joe Rogan, a guy who was on television doing Fear Factor, was a comedian, and
he was a known personality.
Exactly. And it took him years to be successful. So one of the biggest reasons people stop podcasting and don't succeed is unrealistic expectations. They want to release 2 or 3 episodes, and when they don't have thousands of downloads, and they're not getting thousands of downloads, nobody gets thousands of downloads out of the chute. Nobody. So unrealistic expectations kill people. And I think I'm so grateful that I made this decision. I'm going to start, and I'm never going to stop, because Phantom, that way there was no pressure on me to have overnight success.
Well, I think that's the problem with people. Yeah, the metrics people use are because it's like the comparison trap. You're trying to compare yourself to the Joneses or something. You're trying to be like, oh, if I don't
Exactly.
get numbers like Joe Rogan, then I'm done. And it's
Yeah.
just like in music today. We have indie bands that might only have like 5,000 to 50,000 people following. But if they tour and they put out their own materials and they sell their own t-shirts, they can last for 10 years. But if they get this idea that they've got to be as big as like Aerosmith, and then they don't hit it, then they quit. But the indie band that stays around and has a fan base, and they could tour and they can end up going to Netherlands. They can end up going to all kinds of bands that are under like 50,000, 100,000 people, but they're diehard people that actually buy their stuff. And if you you don't go and overextend yourself, you can survive with the base of people that you appeal to.
Yep. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. Are you familiar with the band Head East?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Flat as a Pancake came out my sophomore, junior, senior year of high school. I have bought Flat as a Pancake by Head East, their biggest album. I have bought it on 8-track tape, LP. I bought 45s of theirs, cassette. I bought CDs. The same album, CDs, and then now digital. I bought it and downloaded it on my computer. Now, here's the funny thing. I still love Head East. So what you just said is exactly right. When somebody loves what you're doing, I mean, me personally, that's 50 years for me to buy their stuff. I worked on the radio in Peoria, Illinois, did morning drive there for a couple, 3 different stations. And then that album was recorded in Pekin, Illinois, which is just south of Peoria, if I remember my directions correctly. And I went to where I thought the studio was, and because I wanted to go and I wanted to walk in the door, and just look at it. Yeah. But it burned down. So
that happens. A lot of studios are gone nowadays because you try to find old studios that are not around. You go to Muscle Shoals, you're trying to find, a couple ones there are still around because they're kind of big. But historically, they kept them around because they knew they meant something. Yeah. But a lot of times it's like companies don't even keep some of these studios because they're like, oh, we don't do it that way anymore. It's like, okay,
yeah, that's crazy. I was in Nashville one time and got to go to a studio in Nashville, and that was a lot of fun to experience that. But one of the reasons that your podcast is successful is because you've been around, and people know what they can expect, and they like you, and they like what you're doing, so they keep coming back. And one of the reasons podcast, you keep doing what you're doing. I keep doing vintage science fiction. And now I haven't done it as long as you. I started in 2022, so I'm coming up on 4 years soon. But when podcasts succeed, it's usually because when you start and as you progress for however many years it is, you keep doing the same thing. So it appeals to the same audience.
I think when they show up, half of it is showing up. I mean, plus you gotta love what you're doing. Like if you don't love what you're doing, then people aren't going to.
Too easy to quit.
Yeah, it's very easy to quit when you don't really like it.
Yeah, but also you're right. People can tell. Like one of the coolest 5-star reviews I'll ever get is the ones where people say, "I can tell he really loves what he's doing. I can tell that he really loves science fiction." Those are the ones that I love the most personally because they get me. They get that when I go in this booth behind me, Phantom, every time I go in the booth, I shut the door. I don't just read the story. I act the story.
You're living the story. You're living it out. Yeah.
You are exactly right, man. And I should know. You would know this, but I am living that story. Like right now, I am the guy, the EDS pilot or whatever he's called, the guy that's piloting that EDS to this planet to deliver this life-saving serum to these 6 guys that need it. And I get his devastation at what he's probably going to have to do with this 18-year-old girl stowaway who just wants to go see her brother and hasn't seen him for 10 years. So that story, man, it's in my heart, and it's a privilege to go in that booth and record these stories.
Well,
and
that's like any kind of, because you're an actor, being a voice actor is an actor, right? And
Yes.
when an actor gets a script, I mean, they buy into it because they believe in it. And then if they're going to carry it off, they got to show that passion. Like a musician, if
You're
I go
right.
on stage, if you're just phoning it in, the audience realizes they're phoning it in, and they're not going to vibe with you. And they'll figure out that, well, you're kind of washed up now because nobody wants to see you because you don't put any effort. Like if you put the effort, then you get the response. You get the people feel it, and you give it the back.
You're exactly right. You're exactly. And then you feed off of that audience that is enjoying your performance.
Yeah,
For my podcast, it's the same way. It's the emails that I get from people. It's the guy that tells me that the story I just did, he remembers reading in a magazine when he was 13 years old.
Yeah.
And when I get those emails, man, I get goosebumps from that, just sharing that story with you, because that's really important to that guy. And I really brought back a memory for him unknowingly when I was in the booth recording it.
Yeah.
But it's real.
Yeah, you're bringing back a lot of these, like a lot of people, like, if their childhood is 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, if they're still, engaged, like when they find that you're telling these stories, they find like, wow, they get hyped because, anything that when you're like you're a teenager, right? And you're getting into like whatever you're into, whether it's horror, science fiction, whatever. Like when that story that resonated with you when you were 11 or 12, and you hear it when you're 38 or 52 or 67 or 82, it makes you feel good. And so like you're guaranteed, like your audience is going to feel good every time you do what you're doing, because they pick up on something. It's like, wow, that's a piece of my childhood. That's a piece of something I was like really into. And so they can actually make them happy because maybe they forgot about it. Now you reminded them.
And it's one of the other cool things about having this niche that's so well defined, not just science fiction, but vintage science fiction. 1963 is pretty much the cutoff and back. And not every story that's old is in the public domain. Many are not, but the copyrights were not renewed. So that's what puts them in the public domain, and the time period is expired. But when I'm telling these stories, you never know what you're going to run into. Like, are you familiar with the name Edward Page Mitchell? Most people aren't.
Yeah, I don't know that one.
Yeah, no. Here's what's so cool about him. He was a newspaper editor in New York in the 1880s and 90s. Okay. He wrote for, I believe it was the New York Sun. And he wrote these stories. I've done so far 2 or 3 of his stories. The Crystal Man, which, by the way, is an invisible man before anybody else ever wrote about invisible men. This guy
what if somebody read his?
Yeah, it may be so. And he wrote it, and it was published. And he also did The Man Without a Body, which is a great story. And I forget, I think I've done another one, and I've got other ones of his. Every one of his that I can get my hands on, I will eventually narrate. But here's what's so fascinating. This guy put them in his newspaper that he was editing. A lot of times, no byline. So it was just the story. Nobody knew.
So he didn't even say who it was. He never put it.
No.
Put down. He wrote it.
No. And then here's the crazy part. It because he wrote it in the 1880s and 90s in a newspaper, so it disappeared.
Yeah, that would.
He wasn't discovered. Yeah, he wasn't discovered until somebody found him. I don't remember who, in the 1970s, and then he started telling people this Edward Page Mitchell was a pioneer, dude. He was H.G. Wells before H.G. Wells.
Yeah, sounds like it.
And that's what he was. And so anyway, I love, having discovered his stories. I have a guy that's become a friend who's a listener, who turned me on to him. He turns me on to all kinds of people that I'd never heard of before. And I love narrating that story and giving this guy.
That's like an Easter egg, especially like you found this really cool thing,
Yeah.
It's to find a story like that. Did he actually like save his stories, or did somebody find the newspapers?
Somebody else. I don't know how they discovered him in the 1970s, but I don't think he did. And
he didn't have his own. He didn't have them. Maybe somebody found somebody's newspaper somewhere.
I don't know, but that's one of the stories, a personal story, a story about an author that I love to share with people. And it's so much a passion for me that it makes it easy to go in the booth. And I got to admit, this to be true. There are times when I go, I'm not feeling. Now I'm 66 years old, and I am closer to 67 than I am to 66. Only kids that say they're 2.5 or 3.5 or 4.5, and old people count half years. Only kids and old people, and I'm officially an old people. So, there are times, and I go, I'm kind of tired, and whatever. Yeah. But man, I got to do this, and so I get fired up. I read the story on my laptop or my iPad in the living room or wherever, and then I go in the booth, and I have a 42-inch TV in there, and half of the TV is my recording software, and the other half is my script.
Oh, okay. So you have it like a teleprompter.
So it's like a teleprompter. So I love doing what I do. And if I didn't, and that's why I can easily say, I hope I'm 80 years old, going in this booth several times a week to bring these stories to life. I hope so.
That's what I like about what I think about it is like when I do the podcast itself, I get to hear stories like yours, right? I get to hear what people are passionate about. And I find it's like a master class in humanity. I decided a long time ago, I do live podcast with people that tell their story. And every time I hear somebody's story, it's a master class in what they're passionate about. And to me, and I'm a musician. And so, if you like any writer, we feed on humanity. We feed on stories. We feed on hearing stories. And even though you tell me something, I talk to people, and how I interpret it as a musician, how it comes out of my fingers on my keyboard or my piano, it is different, but it still feeds. It gives me this food of all this humanity that inspires me. So if I was to sit I run to musicians, they say, well, I'm not getting anything. Well, are you talking to anybody? It's like if you don't experience life, it's hard to, it's like Jack Kerouac. He had to go on the road to get the idea. It's like if you don't find a way to get out and get the information or dive into something, well, how are you going to get inspired?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, one of the other things that people say, gosh, do you really want to do this when you're 80? Yes, I do. And I'll tell you why. One of the reasons why. Number one is I love doing it. I feel more alive doing this. And then I'm connected with this audience, which is much bigger than I ever imagined it would be, and growing, which is so cool. But I'm connected with this audience, and then I feed off their energy with their emails and their 5-star reviews and all of the ways that they communicate with me. But one of the other reasons that this is important to me is I watched my own father, when he retired, go downhill pretty rapidly. He passed a few months ago. He was in his mid-80s. So, and that struck me as I saw it even before he passed. And then I have an uncle that was coaching, and he loved coaching, and he coached for decades, and he was still coaching in his early 80s. And he passed, unfortunately, a few months ago. And I was talking to his son, my cousin, And he said, I told him I'm never going to stop doing this. And he said, good for you. Cause I watched Dad when he quit coaching go downhill pretty fast.
A lot of times it's like you really have to have that passion. Like a lot of times if you retire and then you lose, because a lot of times it's like you are your job, right? So when you retire, and if you spend like 30, 40 years in your job, that's kind of who you are. And if you don't find another thing to be passionate about, well, the way human beings work is like if your mind is very powerful. And if you get depressed and you get low energy and you don't feel excited and passionate, then it affects your health. But if you stay,
it does.
Like I'm very passionate about podcasting and music. It's like music to me. I learned it when I was like 13, how to play piano, and I continue to play this because I like to play. I love playing, and so I'm never going to stop. And it keeps you kind of vibrant. Like it keeps your mind.
Yeah.
If you continue to be passionate about like painting or like going out hiking, whatever. Like even if you can't hike, or like you get into find something that you can do.
Yeah.
Because it's like you lose all zest for life, then life starts to lose you.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I can't imagine a future for me where one of the cool things about the podcast is, in my case, you're live, but in my case, I record them. So I took my wife on the most awesome vacation last November, and we went to Europe. We didn't go to Europe. We went to Madrid and Barcelona and Portugal. We didn't go to a ton of different countries, but we went to a few. And we did a 2-week cruise. And so we'd had a 3.5-week vacation. So I can record, because it's my stories. I can record anytime and set them up to be released while I'm gone. So I didn't leave my audience high and dry, and still release 2 or 3 episodes.
You had them in your back pocket. You still had them. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I still like to take my vacations, and we're, thinking about what we're going to do in 2026. So anyway, it is a passion for me, and I will not abandon it. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've been so successful, is because people can feel that passion. And, man, it's a good feeling knowing that you can do what you love, and music, you can do what you love forever. You can do this podcast forever. Same thing. So it's fun.
It's really important. What you're doing is like the stories, though. I mean, because some people, they create like podcasts, and there's so many podcasts today, and some of them are like, okay, it's just an infomercial for this business. Or is it, it's an infomercial because I'm selling some supplement. So like if you're into the sales game, that's fine. You can use this platform for sales. But when you use it for artistry, like you use it for like you're telling sci-fi stories, horror stories, whatever, any kind of story that you feel resonates with you and you're passionate about, people pick up on that you're not phoning it in, that you really love what you're doing. And that it's contagious. That type of passion, and I think that's what people want. They want authenticity. They want to see somebody's really into what they're doing, and it's not like I'm not a hyper uber salesman. I'm not just trying to sell you, like the old days. People selling all the snake oil salesmen. That's not what you're doing.
No. It's funny too. I don't remember. I've got almost 400 ratings on Spotify with an average of 4.9 out of 5, which I'm really proud of. And then I've got all these ratings on Apple Podcasts. I didn't realize until somebody brought it to my attention, one of my listeners, there's Apple Podcasts US, where I got 300 some ratings.
Like different countries.
But then there's Canada and Australia and all these different countries, the UK. So, I get excited about all these 5-star reviews coming in, right? So that somebody left me a review a few weeks ago that said, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember exactly what he said, but basically about the only thing this podcast is good for is putting me to sleep. So that's how I use it. And he gave me, but they gave me 2 stars instead of 1,
stars, like,
which was really nice. But most of my ratings are 5. So the reason I tell you that story is, you can't get so excited that you fail to recognize that you're not everybody's cup of tea.
Oh yeah.
There's some people who don't. Some people don't like my voice.
Resonate with it. Yeah, I mean that's the thing is the thing is that it's interesting today is haters actually spend a lot of time. They spend a lot of time putting in like
hating,
like feedback that's not constructive. Like if you get somebody to say why they come in and they get kind of derogatory or they say something nasty or they say something like I hated it. Like what does that tell me? Like if you don't
it doesn't
like if somebody
anything.
tells you like well you could. Your mic position wasn't good, or they give you some constructive feedback. Say, oh, maybe you could do this with your logo. If somebody tells you something like, oh, you could edit like this, or you could do that, that's fine. But if you just tell me you hated it, you don't tell me why you hate it, that doesn't really help me at all.
Well, no, I agree with you. And I got a 1-star in Germany. Somebody, one of my listeners said, hey, Scott, have you seen this one? I had not. Apple Podcast Germany, this guy says, again, paraphrasing, this guy's trying too hard not to sound like AI, and but he just doesn't like what I'm doing.
He doesn't like what you're doing. It's like, what's the point of that?
Yeah, but the funny thing is there are, I don't know, somewhere around 1,000 reviews where they give me 5 stars and say I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, which I don't believe that either, but that's nice of them to say those things. But I just believe that I'm a guy doing the best I can possibly do, telling these great vintage science fiction stories. And if you don't like my voice, I cannot change it. And if you don't like my delivery, it is what it is, man.
It is what it is, because you think about like Miles Davis, like he was the greatest, one of the greatest jazz guys in the world, right? He's the king of bebop, right? And then when you switch to fusion, people think bebop is like the canon of jazz, like, and so there are people who would say like they hate his fusion work. It's like, well, that's fine. You can hate his fusion work. It doesn't resonate with you, right? But it's like. What his bebop work is with, just because like whatever he's vibing on, like people evolve or people do something that you don't vibe with, and you don't have to listen to it, right? So like people who like fusion, they like fusion. People like bebop, they like bebop. The people like Bach, they like Bach. So if you go in there and it's like, well, you're not doing Bach, it's like, well, go listen to Bach.
The thing about the reviews, when I get the negative reviews, it keeps me humble. It's like, okay, Scott, you are not.
Yeah. Wait, froze up a little bit. What happened? You froze there for a second. I don't know what happened to your screen. We're kind of near the end of the show, but you froze. Hopefully you can come back. Well, we might have to end the show here because he froze. I want to tell people that we do have the QR code up here, which actually is linked to lostsci-fi.com. So you can scan that and you'll be able to go to lostsci-fi.com and be able to listen to the stories that we've been talking about that Scott Miller gives on his own podcast and his website. And so he tells these classic sci-fi stories, the lost sci-fi stories. And I want to thank him for being a guest today. We went like 57 minutes with no internet problem, but we, sometimes that happens, but we pretty much got through most of the show. And I want to thank him for being on the show today. And hope you check it out. Again, scan that QR code, go to https lostsci-fi.com, check it out. And if you want to check this out, we were just live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Kick. We will be on other channels like Spotify, Apple, and iHeartRadio, Amazon, on any channel you want. We're going to create a landing page, and he'll be able to, Scott will be able to give that to his audience, and you can watch it on any platform that you want. We get into the stories that we're telling, some really cool stories about some lost sci-fi stories that maybe you would be interested in, because I think finding these type of stories from the past that can give you kind of clues for our future science fiction was always kind of ahead of the curve. We've talked about science fiction writers from the 1800s that kind of thought about the internet before the net, thought about cell phones before the cell phones. So I think it's interesting to get into that history. And I want to thank Scott for being here today. Thank you. And we'll close today.